I was listening to Dean yesterday, and I was like, oh man, I blew it, because he said how much he disliked animations, and I thought, oh geez, I got a couple of those in my slides. He's gonna hit me for that. But then I was thinking about it a little bit. I was like, batch sizes, maybe animations are on this cadence, or they're large batches, and they're gonna come back into style like fashion. So maybe in 20 years, they'll be cool again, right? So I thought that it was all right to have a couple of them. So I'm here to tell you a little bit about our story. At Intel, we've had this transformation, and I want to walk you through a little bit of the things that we've done, the things that we've seen. And hopefully you can take some of this back, and a lot of you guys are part of large enterprise transformations yourself, and you'll be like, oh, that looks really familiar. We're dealing with the same thing, or we solved that problem too. So that'll be great. So, and we'll talk a little bit about Moore's Law and what that is. So first of all, I want to talk a little bit about Intel. What is Intel? This one's pretty easy for me, because usually when I say I'm from Intel, people immediately say, oh, Intel Inside, or bum, 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 bum. Like they're like, I know that ringtone, right? So Intel's done a great job of branding, and most people have some sort of device or a computer or something that they've seen that brand on it. So to give you a little bit of context about Intel, the company itself, we're actually approaching our 50-year anniversary next year. So it's been around for a while. We're about 100,000 employees. Most of our business, 75%, is done outside of the US. So we're a global company. Typically, we have about 60 billion in revenue per year. And our manufacturing is kind of our bread and butter. We've been really good at this, and we're usually about 1.5 years or 2 years ahead of the industry with this. The other thing too is you'll notice all the products down there. So we have a broad scope of products. And going back, and I'll talk a little bit about this, we used to only have to worry about things like PCs and computers, and servers. And as we see here, we have a lot of new devices that have kind of emerged over the past 10, 15 years. So besides computers and servers, we've emerged into the space where we have tablets, notebooks, netbooks, even set-top boxes, automobiles, everything where technology is starting to emerge. And that's created a couple challenges for us. So a little bit more context about where I work within the organization. So I work in an organization called Manufacturing Validation Engineering, okay? It's kind of a mouthful, and so we abbreviate it with MVE. If you're at a large corporation, you probably know that you have a lot of acronyms. When you go to a big company, it's like learning a new language, right? Okay, I got to learn all these three-letter acronyms and what it means and how they all fit together. So manufacturing validation, we sit right between design and manufacturing. So what we get is we work with design, and design hands us a database of basically zeros and ones. They say, here's a database of zeros and ones, and this describes what the chip is and how it should work. And what we do is we take that and we nail it into something that we produce and that we deliver to the manufacturing that says, here's everything that you need to know how to manufacture this chip. Okay, so, and along the way, we have marketing there that's saying, hey, you got to put these things into the product. You need to, we want these, the customers want these. And so we're trying to deal with, okay, design's designing this, but we got to meet the customer needs too. And then we have business units on the end that we deliver collaterals to also. So that gives you a little bit of context for where we sit. We sit kind of in the middle of the whole process for Intel. So as I'm going through this, you can kind of think back to that, where we're at. Our organization is fairly large, thousands of people, and we sit in between all of we actually have a global footprint here. So we span the globe, which makes things a little bit more challenging. A lot of you guys are dealing with similar things where you have organizations that are spread throughout the world, and you deal with things like communication across the world and everything like that. So we're in 15 sites. We're in 9 countries across the world. You can see them there. And I'll talk about some of those challenges that we have with that too. So our story really begins in 2005. So I'm going to take it back in time a little bit. 2005 is really when we said, hey, we got to change. And this was right around the time that we were saying, okay, well, we do servers good, and we do, computers really good, desktops, and we really know that business really well, and we're really good at doing it. And this gets to the point of 2005 was kind of the introduction of a lot of these other devices, like, okay, we're getting netbooks, we're getting tablets, we're getting all these other things that really created a new market for us. And even going into things like watches. So we were looking at this and we said, oh, there's this thing called Moore's Law. Oh, wait, Gordon Moore was one of the founders of Intel. And how many of you guys are familiar with Moore's Law? Just show of hands. Okay, so you've heard of this in some form or fashion. So Moore's Law, it's been said that if automobile efficiency, the fuel efficiency of automobiles had progressed at the same rate as Moore's Law, that we could go our entire lives driving a car on 1 tank of gas. Okay? So just imagine that. That's a phenomenal rate or pace that this moves at. And so Gordon Moore, this is the actual thing that he published in an electronics magazine. And if you're familiar with the law, it basically states that the number of transistors on a die will double every 1.5 years. Okay? And I kind of took this out and said, okay, there's been some analysis on this, and they've shown that this is true. So this was it was more of an observation that Gordon Moore made back in the 60s. And so he said, hey, I believe this is going to hold true, and lo and behold, it's 2017, and this still holds true today. Okay? So just to put this in a little bit more context, these are the dies that we create, the pieces there. So each one of those little squares is a die or your CPU that you would put in your computer, a watch, or anything like that. And they're different sizes, but this is our latest model, one of our latest models that we have. And that little green spot up there, can anybody guess what that is? It's a P, okay? So when you look at that, the size of a P, that's what drives a lot of the computing power within your either computer, servers, anything like that. And they vary in size, but most of them are about the size of P. If you get to things like watches and stuff like that, they're even smaller. We have ones that are the size of a grain of rice, okay? So those would be for your Internet of Things and things like that. So when you put that into context, you say, okay, this thing is the size of a pea, the size of a grain of rice. And when you put that in contrast too, you say, hey, we have to put 1 billion transistors into that thing, right? So we were looking at this in 2005 and we said, hey, all these products are coming in, Moore's Law is not slowing down, and it's going to crush us if we let it. So we got to change. Something's got to change. The way that we do stuff has got to change. And this really drove us to this place where we said, hey, we got to do something different. So we went out and we started reading books, and even ones from Don and all these people, and we said, hey, we got to figure out how to do this. So we started to say, we're going to think agile, we're going to behave in scrums, we're going to execute lean, and we're going to learn through Lambda or PDCA. Okay? And all these principles were things that we said, how do we get an organization to do this? And at this point, we were dealing with a small sample set. We said, let's apply this to a couple hundred people and see how it works. So we got them all together and we said, okay, we can teach them lean, and a lot of the behaviors of Agile and Scrum align really well with lean and structured problem solving. And so we went into the spaces of, Kaizens and value stream mapping and everything great that comes with lean. And we started doing things like, okay, well, let's create some scrums. And how do we do this? How do we integrate Agile into this? We had a couple Kanban teams. So we had people that were actually behaving fairly well. And we had this small sample of 100 people, a couple hundred people, and we said, this is working really well. And we did that for a year or two. We said, we're seeing great results. Over the couple of years that we did it, we saw basically a 9x increase in productivity, and we said, hey, this is working great, okay? So going down that, we said, we can do this with a couple hundred people, but what happens when we try and do this at a larger scale, okay? And that's really, we had a forcing function of this, and if you guys are part of a large organization or a big company, it seems like the only thing that's on a predictable cadence is reorgs. Okay? So we had a reorg, surprise, it happened. How many of you guys have had that happen? Yeah, exactly. So we had this organization formed, and they said, hey, you're going to be merged into an organization called MDO. And by the way, you know, you're not just 100 or several hundred people now. Now you're thousands of people. Okay, that's all well and dandy, and we know how to do this at 100 people, but how do we do that with thousands of people, okay? So, and this was around 2013, and this is really when our story started with Scaled Agile. So at this point we said, we had some homegrown solutions. We were working with some of the teams and trying to scale them and saying, how do we deliver to something bigger? And we had some homegrown solutions of what scaling looked like. So we're doing things like Scrum of Scrums, and we had, you know, a project manager leading the thing and everything like that. And we said, there's got to be a better way to do this. And that's really when we turned to the industry and said, hey, somebody's got to have a solution for how to scale things better and how to do this better. And that's really when we bumped into some of Dean's work with a SAFe and the Scaled Agile framework. And we said, hey, this looks like it's got a lot of the components that we were doing and a lot of the things that we can relate with. And so the first thing that we did was when we formed this organization of MDO, we went to the GM and we said, hey, we would really like to get sponsorship to drive this transformation amongst your organization. And he looked at the results. We had data. We said, hey, we can do this with 100 people. So we know how to do it. We think we can do this with thousands. So right away he said, okay, I'm willing to support this. Great, we got our executive here that's leading an organization of thousands of people, and he's willing to sponsor this. Hey, by the way, can we have 15 coaches that go do this? Yeah, we're pushing our luck here, right? So he concedes. He says, all right, but I need to see results. I'm going to give you guys a time frame here, okay? So he gave us 15 coaches, which was very generous, we thought. I said, 15 coaches, that's pretty good. Now, how are we going to do this? All right? Well, so we took those 15 coaches and we shipped them off to SAFe class, and we said, all right, let's figure out what this means. And this was December. So December of 2013, I remember going to this class, and we sat there and we listened to everything, and we were just kind of like, oh yeah, this really resonates with us. This kind of gives us the trail through the forest. We were looking at this, we said, we have a lot of these things here, but we really didn't know which way to go, but now we can kind of see that trail. It's very well documented. They've got nice pictures, abstracts, kind of that guide map to get us there. So we went back and we mapped all these roles to ours, and we said, we think we got some of these things. We can map them to them. We won't surprise people too much. We'll try and keep things in line. And by the way, when you go through a reorg, you get a lot of chaos, right? So we were like, hey, there's a lot of chaos. What happens if we throw a little bit more on? Nobody will notice, right? So, so we thought, hey, this is the perfect time to do a little bit of this. Like, let's look at the system, see what the system can bear. We don't want to scare them off too much, but let's fill it out and kind of see what we can do with this. So we go back and we said, hey, we want to launch these trains. And this is where it gets back to, Mel's talk, the 5-second rule. We're like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, let's do this thing. We get back in December and we said, we're going to launch some trains. Well, when should we do that? Okay, well, let's go ahead and do that. So we get everybody together and we say, all right, we got to identify the value streams. You guys are familiar with all this. You've probably done it with your organizations. You've seen this. And we said, here's the value streams. We got our leadership bought in. Not only our executive, but now we got to tell all the other leaders. Okay, so there's a lot of people in the middle that we need to get their engagement. So don't forget about those guys. They're important, okay? So we set up some Scrum teams, some train rules. So some of them you can see there, the size, the co-location, they're cross-functional, the commitment. We decided on our electronic tool. We needed to have something there to manage all this stuff with everybody. We're across, the world. We have 15 sites across the world. I don't think sticky notes are going to work for this in some cases. So, and then we trained 1,500 people. We said, we got to get these people up to speed. We need to let them know what the plan of attack is here and what they're going to be involved in. And we came out of this with about 170 Scrum teams and 8 trains. And we said, okay, now we got to launch these things. So we scheduled the releases, we scheduled the events, and all the core meetings. We got things every set up. And then we said, okay, we need to communicate this at a large scale. And I can't overemphasize how important it is to communicate this. Everybody has questions. Everybody wants to be involved. They want to say, hey, we want to see that vision. Don talked about it. How do you engage people and let them know what's going on? Give them that common goal. What are they working towards? What's the end vision? So we put all that together and we kicked it off. Oh, and by the way, in less than 2 months, and this was December, so everybody left for Christmas and New Year's. So January, we come back and we say, hey, let's kick this off. And we did it. We did 8 trains around the world. So we had people in Israel, Malaysia, Costa Rica, the US. We had all these people in different sites. The thing that we did too is we said, not only are we going to launch these trains, but they're all going to be on the same cadence. So they will all plan in the same week. Okay? You don't get a pick. We kept that decision, right? So we had these 8 trains and they kicked it off, and you can see some of the pictures here. These are from the different sites that we actually kicked it off. And all of us spent a lot of time prepping this. We did the program boards and put all the blue tape in and made everything nice, and I'll tell you, that's a lot of work. I remember that. We did that, and this is what we end up with. We had these nice big program boards, and exactly how Dean taught us. We're like very proud of this. So had our sticky notes and the yarn and everything, and the teams came back to us and they said, hey, this is great. We got the yarn and we can see the dependencies, and we got all our features up there and our stories broken down. And then we said, hey, oh, by the way, you guys need to transpose those to our electronic tool. And they said, huh? That doesn't sound like fun. So we listened to that feedback. We said, that was good. Got them involved and engaged in the experience, but probably not a long-term solution. We're gonna catch a lot of slack for that. So we probably need to improve that and get better at that. So one of the things that we did was we took this program board and realized this was 2013, so a long time ago, and a lot of the tools that exist today were not there. So one of the things that I did was we were working with our partners. Back then it was Rally. And I went to a hackathon. So this is me telling my boss, I really think people hate transposing those sticky notes into the tool. Well, the good thing was I went to this hackathon with Rally, and I said, I think we can make this better. So I sat down for 2 days with a developer, and I said, here's what I want to do. I want to take this and transpose this program board into something that's in the tool that works right in Scene, which was great because there was an open API that I could tap into and do all this stuff. And so in 2 days myself, so I'm very attached to this first prototype that we had here, because I spent a lot of time in a room and a night, with no sleep with a developer from Rally. And I said, hey, this is what I want to create. And so after 2 days, I came back to my boss and I said, hey, look, this is what I created. Here's the prototype for how this is going to work, okay? And so the only reason I got him to let me go to the hackathon is he said, Alan, I know you're going to come back with something useful. And I said, I will do that for you. So I came back with this thing and he said, this is great, people are going to love this. So we came back with the digital program board, which we called it. And we said, and it's been improved since then. But then we had this prototype that we iterated on, made it better. It had boards for everybody. So they could go into PI planning, and they would basically say, okay, now I don't have to take all these sticky notes and move them across and transpose them. So they could do all their planning right in the tool, which they love. So they said, hey, this isn't too bad. This goes back to, what can the system bear? Because I'm sure if we still had them in a room doing sticky notes, they would revolt. Okay? So we did that. Another thing that we did was we went back to the basics. So we found that, and I think you guys have seen this in a couple other talks, getting the foundation there and the core there is very important. So ensuring that the teams are functioning properly, and I think Dean always says you can't scale crappy Scrum. So that's one of his quotes, and we use that quite frequently because it's truly a fact. If you don't have the foundations and everything in place, you're going to have an extremely hard time taking this to the larger level. And so what we did is we said, okay, we got to get things in place. We got to get the co-location in place. We got to get the commitment in place, cross-functionality and the size of the teams. So we created this thing, we call it the Christmas tree because it's got pretty colors on it. But this is something that is a tool that we can monitor our organization and say, how are we progressing? Now the goal here wasn't to get it green immediately. We know that, you know, moving a multinational and dispersed geographically teams is hard. So we said, hey, we want to get this eventually to become better. It's not like it's got to change overnight, but if there's opportunities where you can make things co-located through somebody attrits, or you know, you move a team or skills are transferred, look at this. And this was something for us to work with our leaders. So we really worked with the leaders and we said, your guys' role is really to design the right teams and to design them effectively. Anytime that we did not have a team with these attributes, we were saying, hey, you know, we're accommodating waste. This doesn't apply to the lean rules. If we can make these things, we're going to become more effective. And so we took some goals and we said, hey, this is where we're at today. You don't have to change it overnight, but give us a plan. Tell us how you want to move towards a better state. What's your target state? And how are you going to get there? Okay? And so we made significant improvements over the year, and basically tried to get that there. Some other things that we put in place were some key indicators. So making everything visible, and this is obviously a key point. You can go, anybody at Intel can go to these websites and look at this data. It's real time. We don't hide it. Anybody can see it. Our GM looks at it periodically and says, how are we doing? Now on the left-hand side, you can see normal. On the right-hand side, you can see abnormal. So we wanted to make things visual indicators that we could look at a glance and tell, is there something wrong with the system? Okay? So the big thing with this is your leaders need to be trained so that when they see the red, what's the typical reaction of a leader when they see red? They go back to the teams and they say, fix this thing. You know, something's wrong. So we had to spend a bit of time with teaching the leaders to use their inside voices. We call them, so when you go to your teams and you see red, red's not an indicator to go to your teams and yell at them and say, hey, fix this. The red means you go to the teams, use your inside voice, and ask the question, how can I help? Okay? And that's very important because the tone, the micro inequities, the way that you interact with your teams, and going back to Don's talk, the leadership piece of it is a huge piece of this transformation, okay? So, and I'll tell you, even today, some of the leaders will struggle with this. But I think that training and helping them understand, and every once in a while we have to remind them, hey, use your inside voice, so that the teams realize that this is safe, it's a place to grow, and that they have the opportunities to progress. If you get the other behavior, you get kind of going back to the pigeons example of Don, the pigeon in the corner that's afraid to peck anything. That's what you'll get if you get the wrong reaction from your managers. Okay. So we had our indicators in place, and basically we're at this place, and I'll give you a personal example because we did this for about a year and a half, and about a year into it, I was sitting in one of the release plannings, and one of the biggest challenges that we had at Intel with our trains was we were very siloed. So the team said, I know my function, and I know what I need to do, but I don't know how to work with these other people. And so putting them in trains forced them to do that in the PI events, but they still kind of siloed and said, yeah, I kind of got my piece of it. And I remember sitting there about a year into this, and this was probably our fourth or fifth release or PI cycle. And I was sitting there in the release planning, and it was funny because they usually sit at their tables and they start doing their planning and everything. And it was very odd because 3 or 4 teams, they got up at their tables and they moved the tables together. And I sat back and I was like, what's going on over there? This is odd. You know, I usually don't see this behavior. They usually just sit down and do their own thing. But this was kind of the a tipping point for me where I saw, hey, we're really getting this. Because without any pushing or helping or anything, these 3 people, 3 teams, 4 teams got together, they pushed their tables together. And I was just observing. I went over and said, hey, how are things going? What are you guys working on? And they said, well, there's this problem that we have at the train, and we need to solve it, and we think we can solve this together. I was like, oh, it's happening. I heard about this. First time, it's like seeing a unicorn, right? Everybody knows what they look like, but nobody's ever seen one, right? So I was like, oh my gosh, better take a picture or something. But so I looked at this and I was like, it's really happening. They're swarming at the train level. This is amazing. It's phenomenal. And that was really great for me. I felt a sense of pride, like, okay, like they're actually doing this and they're getting that vision and they're starting to self-organize and solve problems at a bigger scale. It's not just their team, okay? So that was really great. So going to, let's fast forward, going back to around 2016, guess what happens? What's on a predictable cadence at big organizations? Reorgs, right? So, hey, you guys are a couple thousand people. What if we add some more people to that? All right, so we had 170 Scrum teams, and we're doing this, and we're doing trains, and we're doing them pretty well, we think. We've been doing it for a couple years, and we say, hey, this is working out pretty good. Let's merge 2 other organizations together and create a new one. All right, sounds good. So this other organization had a small following. They were kind of in their infancy. So going back a couple years, they were probably where we were at several years before that. They had about 25 Scrum teams. They were kind of experimenting with some things. They had looked over at us and said, hey, how do you do this? So they actually had a couple trains, which was good. So we had 11 trains at that point. We had merged some things and split them up and had 11 trains at that point. And the other organization had 3 trains, and we said, okay, we're going to merge all these people together. And along the line there at the bottom, you can see, we had the Scrum teams, we had the digital tool enhancements. Some of the key things that we had improved was our inspect and adapt cycles. One thing that we were kind of missing at the beginning of our trains, and we really focused on that and said, hey, we really need to invest in continuous improvement and how to do this better. Okay, so now that we have MVE, great. This is great. We just added thousands of people. So hey, here we go again. Groundhog Day, right? The great thing about Groundhog Day is it's like you can see the future, right? You know exactly what's coming. And so we looked at this and we said, hey, we know how to do this. All right, let's go. And so the only challenge with this that we found was with a new organization, we didn't understand them quite as well as the organization that we were in. So one of the things that we did is we said, okay, we got to learn about this organization, what they do. So we had some key questions, and we basically just went out and interviewed them. We sat down with teams, we sat down with leaders, and we said, hey, what do you guys produce? And they said, oh, well, we do this. Oh, that sounds interesting. That's really awesome. Who are your customers? They'd say, oh, well, here's who we give stuff to. Okay, well, how do your customers measure quality? And they said, well, usually they complain. Okay, well, do you guys have a better thing that you guys maybe look at before you give it to your customer? So we started asking these questions, and then, how do you know where you start and how do you know where you end? So this was helping us find those value streams, or what were the functions that we needed to complete or to basically organize this new organization that we were in. And so here we go again. We trained, another 2,000 people, and we came out with 450 Scrum teams, and now we got 28 trains. Okay, this is a little bit bigger. We got to make sure we train the leaders and everybody's engaged. And we went through the same stuff. We scheduled the meetings. Once again, the communication now is even more important because there's a lot more people involved. Okay, there's a lot more leaders. The other thing, too, is when you go into organizations and you try to make large changes, a lot of times they're doing things really great. And you have to be careful that you're not, kind of basically, you don't want to offend them with the stuff that they're doing. So you have to go in and approach it in the right way so that they realize that you're there to help them, The work that they're doing is probably good, and how do you latch onto that, and how do you not discount what they're already doing? So our biggest goal with this one was just participation. So let's get them all in there, let's get them involved, help them see what's going on, and help them engage in this. And we did this, and it went pretty well, actually. With Widening the Circle, now we have this organization of thousands of people, and there's other business units that we interact with. And so we got this weird effect where a lot of people are kind of peeking over the fence. They're like, what the heck is going on over there? Something's different about your guys' organization. And so Intel is very large. Like I mentioned earlier, it's 100,000 people. So with the 100,000 people, you know, we're a small drop in the bucket here. So all these other organizations are looking at it and saying, wait, you guys can tell that you're predictable? All this stuff's visible? Like, do they allow you to do that? That sounds kind of scary. But all these things that we were getting, they're saying, hey, your guys' quality has really changed over the last couple of years. We've noticed that it's improved significantly. And then a lot of the other organizations were like this guy here. They're looking over the fence like, something's going on over there. We're not quite sure what it is. So we started getting a lot of pull from other organizations. And today, I couldn't even tell you how many trains are at Intel in total, because we've coached a lot of other organizations where they've said, hey, you know, we're in design. We see what you guys are doing is really valuable. Could you guys come over to us? Hey, we're in IT. Can you come help us? Even HR, finance. These organizations that we thought would never come to us for this, they say, hey, looks like you guys have done this. You're pretty good at figuring out how to do it. Can you come help us and give us some training or help our organization? So this was an important piece of the widening the circle at Intel. And I can tell you today, we get a lot of this pull, and there's still a lot of organizations that will improve and can improve. So, all right, what did we learn? So this has been quite the journey, and we've learned a lot, and I've touched on some of those things. Some of the big things that I picked out was basically the complex value streams and the strong connections between them. And I thought with SAFe 4.0, this was really interesting because they introduced the solution piece of it. And I think we were in that space kind of figuring, hey, we're kind of doing this. And when they put it on paper, we were like, yeah, that's exactly it. You know, we got the solution space there. We have all these trains that are working together, and now they got to connect in some way. So creating those strong connections is very important, especially when you're dealing with a lot of trains and how they work with each other. The other thing too is the continuous improvement. So I mentioned it earlier, the inspect and adapt cycles. This is something that we didn't know if the system could bear it early on, but we said we know we need to do it. So we introduced it a little bit later, I think about 6 months into it. And we found that this was very important for how do we improve and how do we get better at the train level. And so that was a key takeaway for us. Train management. So the train management was when they first got into this, I think they had it's the same thing when you put a Scrum team together, the product owner, they have a really hard time saying no. Okay, so the train management had that same challenge. And I think the biggest thing for us was they didn't know how to negotiate scope effectively. So a lot of effort went into, hey, here's some of the knobs and some of the things that you can turn, and some of the things where you have leeway, and how to negotiate that scope, and how you deal with your partners, whether it be marketing or external customers. And that was really important to us, because as they started to find those knobs, they became more effective at saying, okay, now we know how to get the biggest business value, because before we were just trying to shove it all in. Now we can kind of set things aside or do things differently, or make those decisions on what's really important. And then the last one there, engaging the leaders early so they can speak for the transformation. And this was really important too. Being process coaches and leading transformations, we didn't want to feel like we were the people speaking for this. We said, you know, we want the leaders to come in, and we want them to be part of this, and we want them to talk to their people and tell them why this is important. I think this was one of the more challenging things, was getting the leaders engaged and helping them see the value and what they were actually going to get from this. Okay. Some of our key learnings, executive sponsorship. So if you don't have it, this will accelerate your transformation significantly. So grassroots is great, and you can get there. It might just take you a little bit longer. The leadership ownership, which I just talked about, this was very important for us, getting those guys engaged. Taking action towards the target state quickly. So this goes back to the 5-second rule. Act quickly when you know what the right thing is to do. And inspect and adapt, because most likely you're not going to get it right the first time, okay? But it's important to move in the right direction. And we always said progress over perfection. So let's move. Let's keep things moving, and we'll inspect and adapt, but we don't have to get it perfect before we implement it. The other thing that we always go back to, and I see this a lot when I was dealing with the trains early on, is they would always struggle with some of the principles. And so everything that SAFe teaches and scaling, you can translate back to the very core simple principles. And I found that very, very useful with my coaching is, okay, well, hey, an RTE, that's just like a Scrum Master. So let's take it down a level. Let's break it down into something that's manageable and that we can talk about and that you're familiar with. The next one, this one was very interesting to us too, the established clear help chains. So one of the challenges that we ran into early on was the trains were set up, and when they got into positions where they didn't know what to do, they didn't know where to go. So an example of this would be, your train management, your RTEs, they get kind of stuck. They say, hey, we need to make a prioritization call, or we don't know what to do in this case. So we needed to develop those very clear help chains of, if you get stuck, here's where you go ask for help. And this is exactly how we set it up. We gave them one slide that said, here's exactly how you get help. And going directly up through our executive management, if you get stuck, here's where you go ask for help. It even came to the point where our GM, he very supportive. He said, during release planning events, he said, I want all of my staff to give their numbers, their cell phone numbers, to everybody on the train. And they posted them. It's like, here's release planning. Here's all your leaders' phone numbers, their personal cell phone numbers. And if you need anything during your PI events, you are more than welcome to call them, even if they're at home. Okay? So, and this goes back to the removing impediments, helping them make that progress while they're in the room. We didn't want to block them. And then obviously the communication piece of it, which I've talked about a lot already. Another thing that I want to maybe touch on is the continuous improvement piece of it, because I think continuous improvement is very important. So one of the things that we've done more recently is our GM has actually looked at it and said, hey, we need to invest in the long-term solution of creating capacity. So we're very, not only agile, but we look into lean a lot. And so one of our big things is waste elimination. How do we eliminate waste, and how do we create that capacity? So our GM actually put out an initiative that one day of every sprint, so think 450 teams, he's basically telling them, one day of every sprint, you need to stop. It's a stand down day. And they say, well, what are we going to do on that day? Your only focus on that day is to work on waste elimination. We want you to get waste out of the system. We want you to look at continuous improvement, innovation, anything that you can do to remove that, because investing in that for the long term is far more important. And so what happened when we did this is everybody said, are you sure? I'm pretty sure if I take a day off and just innovate or work on waste elimination, my boss is going to come to me and maybe say, hey, what's going on here? So there was a little bit of fear there. But our GM did a smart thing. He came out, and this was in all of his meetings. He said, I don't care what product schedule you're working on or what product you're working on. He said, it can wait a day. He said, and if you think it can't wait a day, you call me and we'll have a conversation. He said, waste elimination is so important, and I give you permission to take that day to focus on eliminating waste, continuous improvement, and making those improvements so that down the road, we don't run into those problems. And I think that was very critical. So if you go to any one of these teams, every sprint they will have a day that they say, this is our stand down day. We don't do meetings. We get in a room or we collaborate and we say, how can we eliminate waste? How can we make our process better? How can we do our continuous improvement? So right there, we had 10% of their time saying, hey, this is focused on waste elimination. And they do that for a day. And by the way, your executive just told you there's nothing more important, not even a product schedule, okay? So I think that was very important. So the continuous improvement piece of it's huge. Make sure that you're eliminating waste. Make sure that you're making those improvements so that you're not going to starve yourself down the road, okay? Our results. So this is the big piece. That's the, hey, what did you guys get out of this? So our organization, we've been able to deliver 65 more product variants. So go back to when I was talking about, hey, all we used to have to deliver was a desktop computer and a server. Okay, we all know today our group delivers anything from, chips that go in self-driving cars, into watches, into tablets, into all these different things. So if we hadn't done this, there's no way we could have supported all those products. The scale and the number of products that we've seen has gone up significantly since we first started this. So we saw an improved commit to accept ratios. So we went from 74 to 90. And I want to talk a little bit about this because the 90% is good, but we want to make sure we're delivering the right business value. And the 90% includes that 10% of continuous improvement. So really, we're doing 80%, and the 10% for continuous improvement gets us to 90. And the 90% is our target because we feel like if we're at 100%, we're not allowing the teams to take enough risk, okay? So we want to give them that buffer that it's okay to get close to the goal. You don't have to be 100% all the time. You need to take risk and you need to be able to do that. So we never target 100%. The scope change reduction. So when we first started doing this, we saw a lot of bouncing around, things coming in and a lot of significant growth in scope initially. And so one of our targets was, how can we keep that flat? It's all right if we have to say no, but this goes back to how do you train your train management so that they're capable of saying no and they can make those decisions, right? Because eventually they're going to say it doesn't all fit. So instead of kidding ourselves and just saying, hey, we're going to shove it all in and scope grows and we just deliver the wrong things or the scope's big enough that we never end up hitting our goals, we said, hey, let's get this down to scope growth is 5%. So that's been a significant thing for us. Everything is visible to everybody at Intel. So mostly our group are the people that are concerned with it. They're the ones looking at it, but we've had other organizations say, hey, how are you guys doing? Can I look at how you're progressing? Can I see what I'm getting? Or I'm a supplier, I'm a customer of yours. Can I see how things are progressing? So everything is visible to everyone. And I think that's very important. There's no hiding. It's transparency. Everybody sees everything. The common language, and I think this is something that SAFE really helped us with, is the big picture that Dean always talks about. It's really helped us with that common language. It's got the roadmap there, kind of the trail through the forest. And then it also creates that sense of community. When we get together in these PI events, not only do we plan, but we do, we'll do a game or we'll do lunches or things like that to bring the people together so they get to interact together. The other thing, customers and leadership are changing their behaviors to protect the cadence. So a lot of times, even ourselves, we'll go and say, hey, we want to give a training on this work week. Oh, that's PI planning week. You can't touch that week. So we get a lot of our leaders now. They're engaged in this. They're participating. I want to tell you a little story real quickly about some of our leaders and engaging, because when we initially started this, as transformation coaches, we were playing the roles of RTs. Today, we don't do that very much. So one of the things that our leaders said is they said, hey, I'm a senior leader in the organization. I have several hundred people reporting to me. Wouldn't it be great if I was an RT? That sounds like a great idea. Why don't we try that? Why don't we help you do that? So these people are engaging in the system, they're participating in the system, and I think that's one of the hugest things that or accomplishments that we've had, is seeing the transition from transformation coaches performing these roles to your leaders and your organization participating in and saying, hey, these are things that we value. The roles are important. We're going to participate in the system. We get visibility by doing that. We can help our people. We can remove impediments. And so that's been a huge thing for us. And then the last thing here is just the teams that demand adherence when the environment becomes chaotic. So, and this goes back to they're really about protecting their ground, protecting the system and seeing what they can do with that. So, okay, so where are we today? This is where we're at today. Basically, if we look at it, we've merged a couple times, we have those reorgs, and we've got down to, I think we're actually more than 450 now, and we're splitting trains all the time. The thing that I also found is sometimes with our trains initially, we designed them a little bit big, and so we're like, yeah, maybe we need to break this down into something that's more manageable. And that's been one of our learnings more recently, where we say, hey, can we break these down into something that enables flow better? So this is where we're at today, and I think that just in closing, I think the biggest things for us that I could leave with you is this isn't easy, okay? We all know it. We're transformation coaches, and we're here for a reason. And I think the persistence and keep going, keep working on that, and you'll start to see the results. I can say in our case, we've definitely seen that results, and it's been a great experience. And we're definitely not perfect either. And I know that going forward, we have a lot of work to do. There's still a lot of things, a lot of problems that we need to solve. But take a minute and celebrate your wins. It's very important. Because if you get in this grind where you're always trying to push forward, but you don't look back and say, here's the great things we've done, you're going to lose yourself in always looking forward. So take the time, celebrate the wins, look back and look at your achievements. And I think you guys can do it. It's a great experience. So I think that's all I have for you. Thank you very much.